We continue the march toward the NFL season, and we're going to dive into the NFC West tonight. Yanni, you getting excited for football, pulling a little closer?
I am really excited, man. You and I obviously were chatting, and it's just boring right now. I mean, nothing against baseball or anything else going on out there. I mean, maybe people are watching the Olympics, but I'm ready for some football.
Yeah, I was so bored earlier. I put on beach volleyball, which don't get me wrong, they're impressive, but like I'm ready for some football. So
no doubt.
Well, hey, if you're tuning in and you have not already subscribed to this channel, please do that. Hit the like button, leave a comment, and also we got a bunch of other division previews up. So if you've missed any of those division previews, go back and check those out as we move closer to the season. That said, let's jump right into the AFC West with the Denver Broncos. Sean Payton, head coach, of course. Joe Lombardi comes in from the Chargers. Offensive coordinator Vance Joseph. Defensive coordinator, their over-under is set at 5.5. Plus 105 to the over is the best I could find, but we're pretty close to even. And plus 2,200 to win the division and dethrone Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. What do you think about this year's version of the Broncos, Yanni?
This is not going to be a good version of the Broncos. And, the Broncos are kind of one of those teams, it seems like every year they're competitive, right? They win some games, they're in some games. But they obviously haven't been able to kind of regain anything since the Peyton Manning era there. And of course that really plays to the quarterback position. Now, when we look at what they have here, essentially they're going to be rolling Bo Nix out there. And obviously that's an unknown, right? We don't know what we're going to get there. Here was my initial thought with this Denver team, and I'll break it down a little bit more. But my initial thought was, just like we talked about a couple of these other teams like Carolina and these teams with low win totals, they're low for a reason. You go under for a reason. But I'm not sure I want to do that with this Denver team. And here's why. I think Bo Nix is an unknown. And obviously any rookie quarterback is going to be an unknown. I was never a Bo Nix guy in college. Now, granted, I'm not a huge college football guy to begin with, so take that for whatever that's worth. But I kind of felt like he came in with all this hype. He transferred around. He never really did a whole lot until kind of his last year there. And I don't know, but here's the thing. It's hard to know what's real and what's not real in these training camp videos and breakdowns you see. But word is he looks pretty good in training camp. And I mean, is that going to be enough for this team this year? No, because I think their roster overall is not great, which, I'll dive into here again a little bit more. But I feel like this is a team that obviously the trajectory of this team is going to go with Bo Nix, because either Nix is going to develop and Sean Payton's going to have something there and they're going to be able to figure this out in a year or two, or Bo Nix is not going to develop. This team's going to be in that eternal spiral that they've been in since Peyton Manning left. So it's almost a wait and see for me. And, I've got a handful of bets that we'll talk about during this podcast, but with Denver, I don't really have much that I see one way or the other, because I don't know what we're going to get with Bo Nix here. And I just think that there is some upside there. And even though I'd like to fade this team, I don't want to do it under the guise of Bo Nix coming in and maybe giving them a little spark and maybe they win 7 or 8 games. Who knows? So let me just go a little bit deeper here and then I'll give it over to you. Sean Payton won a lot of games in New Orleans, right? He had an explosive offense. He had Drew Brees. He had a really good offensive line. This Denver offensive line is okay, right? They're not horrible, but they're not great in my opinion. And then, of course, we don't know if Bo Nix is Drew Brees yet, right? I mean, maybe he'll be a great quarterback. Chances are he won't, right? I mean, it's more likely that he won't be than he will be. But when you look at Sean Payton's earlier success and you try to compare it to this team, you start to wonder, is Sean Payton a good coach, or was he just kind of the beneficiary of having a really good quarterback and, a great offensive line with, pretty good defense and all that? And that's kind of where I am with this Denver team. When I look at the roster, they didn't do a whole lot in the offseason, in my opinion, to make this team that wasn't that good a year ago any better. And we talk about that all the time. Most teams get better in the offseason. And I don't know that this Denver team did. Again, I'll say it again, the quarterback position, of course, would be the determining factor there. But, you kind of look, they lost some good veteran players when you look at, guys like Justin Simmons and Josie Jewell on the defensive side of the ball. Guys that maybe never hit their potential, but like Jerry Jeudy, he's no longer there on the offensive side. Who knows how big of an impact that'll have? I mean, Marvin Mims is an explosive guy. We'll see. But I mean, when you look at it there, they just didn't bring in a lot. And they, again, losing guys like Simmons and Jewell in that, I don't like that. So, when I look at this roster and this team overall, I think that win total, again, I would lean under, but I'm a little afraid not afraid. I mean, for them, that would be great. But I'm my only concern with betting the under there is that Bo Nix could be that guy. And if he is, who knows? But overall, to me, this is a very mediocre roster. A lot of what I would consider average talent, kind of across the board there. With a coaching staff that maybe was a little bit overvalued based on what they had in their previous regime, at least at the head coach position. So,
yeah, man, I agree with that. Real quick, you were talking about training camp videos, and I just want to highlight that I saw on X that JJ McCarthy apparently is Patrick Mahomes.
I saw
so
that
the
too.
Vikings are going to be in the Super Bowl. It's just good news, and I wanted to share it.
I see that too. And it's like, that's the thing. We don't know what to make of these videos,
Totally.
right? We see these clips and you see a great play and you're like, wow, maybe this guy's really good. But then it's like, what else are we seeing? I think Bo Nix falls into that group. So anyways,
it cracks me up. It's like, oh, you clipped one play out of all the practices they've had, and now someone's amazing or terrible the other way, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, look at this terrible throw, and it's like, okay, it was one play. I mean,
right.
So yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty similar here, Yanni. You said it where you talk about everybody gets better. I think this team got worse. I do think losing Justin Simmons is a big deal. I think they never got what they could out of Jerry Jeudy, and I think that was partly Jerry Judy's fault. I think he had a bad attitude. I think the offense wasn't geared toward him. I think Russell Wilson was pretty terrible last year, to be honest. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to get it going. I think Jerry Jeudy probably ends up being a pretty decent receiver. And when we get to the Browns, I think that could be a really nice addition for them. So basically they've lost talent from a team that I would say got kind of lucky to get to 8-9 in some sloppy games. The other thing is the running back situation here. Javonte Williams was supposed to be the guy. And now you get these reports every other week of, is he even going to make the team or not? It doesn't sound like they're too high on him. Jaleel McLaughlin, definitely a dynamic player, and we saw that last year. But it's hard to imagine a guy that small being able to carry much of a workload. So I just don't think they have much to work with here. Cortland Sutton is fine. Josh Reynolds is fine. Marvin Mims we'll see. Like you said, he could be explosive, but they didn't get him the ball last year. Tim Patrick probably won't stay healthy. So I just look at this team on both sides of the ball and just am not impressed anywhere. So it does come down to Bo Nix to some extent, and you sort of said this, but the ceiling is low even if Bo Nix is decent, especially for this year. I have them winning 4.95 games, so I have them just under that 5.5. Like you said, I'm not running to bet this because I have other bets I like better. But that is the way that I would lean, would be the under on this team. The one of the things that keeps me off of it a little bit, and we'll see as we go through this division where you're at on other teams, but even though their schedule I have is sort of a middling schedule, I'm not super high on this division other than the Chiefs. So, I think they could squeak out some sloppy games and maybe get to 6. So I'm fine leaving it alone. All right. Any other bets on the Broncos? Any players or anything else you're looking out for?
No, I think for me, out of the 4 teams, the Broncos to me are the least appealing in any kind of betting. Again, if you asked me to bet Denver, I would take their win total under. But to your point, there's a lot more out there that I don't think that needs to be pressed. This team, we'll see. I mean, like I said, their trajectory is going to be one way or the other, right? They're either going to have their guy at quarterback and this team will be headed in the right direction, or they probably won't have their guy at quarterback and they're going to be in that continued spiral they've been in.
Yeah. This is a team that I'm not even very excited to watch. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, but I'm going to be okay passing on Broncos games this year, I think, for the most part.
For sure.
All right, well, let's move on to a team that obviously brings a little more excitement to the table. The Kansas City Chiefs. We know the story here. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, they got coming back. Their over-under is set at 11.5, and it's, again, close to even. I have a little bit of plus 100 to the under, but pretty close to even. Minus 230 to win the division. So obviously prohibitive favorites, as they usually are in this division to get it done. Is that the way you see it going, Yanni?
I will say this. Normally you don't run out on a bet like this in a division with a team that's such a quote unquote heavy favorite. But I'll be honest with you, this number should be like minus 400 to me, to Kansas City, honestly. And I've already bet them even at the heavy juice there to win this division. This division, I think this Chiefs team is going to be better than they've been the last year or two. And oh, by the way, they won the Super Bowl, right? And I actually think they could be better. And when I look at the division, I think the division is worse than it's been. We talked about the Broncos. Obviously, we haven't gotten into the Raiders and the Chargers yet there. But you've got, as long as you've got Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, and Patrick Mahomes there, they're winning this division. I'm sorry. That coaching staff is too good. Mahomes is too good. And I'm going to be honest with you. We can talk about the roster a little bit. They brought in Carson Wentz as a backup to Mahomes. I'll be honest with you, and this is not a slight to Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I think he's the best quarterback in the league. I think they win without him. I really do. We've seen limited sample sizes, albeit small sample sizes, when Mahomes has been out. Their offense doesn't skip a beat. And I'm not saying that if he missed the season that, the offense wouldn't skip a beat. That's not fair. But I just think that with Reid and Spagnuolo and the other, pieces they have there, this team is too good to not win this division. So I don't know, man. Minus 230 is not enough for me. I mean, to me, that's very appetizing is what I should say there. I think this number should be way larger than that. So, give me the minus 230. I think you could say over 11 and a half, because chances are with their schedule, and we haven't talked about that, they have a pretty easy schedule. Part of it is the division that they play in, but I mean, they don't have the toughest schedule in the world. I've got them at 23rd hardest. So, I mean,
I'm at 27th, so I'm even lower than you are.
Even lower. Yeah. So, I mean, they don't have a tough schedule, but I think more than the win total, I think you lay the extra juice and you say who's taking this division from them? I'm sorry. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. So, we can get into the team a little bit there. I mean, I'll just touch on it briefly. They kept the core together, right? The guys you mentioned, the Chris Jones and those type of players. And I think that's big. And look, at some point, Kelsey started to look a little more human last year. Chris Jones at some point is going to slow down a little bit. So we know that some of that core is aging. But, a lot of those kind of second tier guys they were able to keep together. And I think that's important too. Some of those kind of role guys. They had a couple losses there, obviously on the offensive line, Donovan Smith, who really kind of struggled a little bit anyways for them, Nick Allegretti. So, we'll see how that goes. Obviously, we know this team does need good protection, but I don't know that that's going to be enough to really knock them down when you look at that. They did draft an offensive tackle early. We'll see. The one big loss, I think, obviously, is L'Jarius Sneed on the defensive side of the ball, because he was playing as well as any defensive player in the league last year. And, when you had him and McDuffie, it's like, good luck, right? Like, how are you throwing on these guys? We'll see. Will the loss of Sneed, can they overcome that? I'm sure they can, but will they be as dominant? I don't know. I think people forget that this team finished second overall in defense last year.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, you don't think about it, right? You think Chiefs, whatever. It's not what you think about. I mean, essentially, they were one of the best defenses in the league, and I think they will be good again. Maybe not quite as good. Maybe that loss of Sneed, like we said. But overall, this is going to be a good team. And I think the reason I said they could be even better is that offensive side of the ball. I mean, we looked last year and we're like, who's playing receiver for these guys? Right? It's like who's making plays? And mostly they didn't, right? I mean, they got a little bit out of Rashee Rice, but it was kind of the same thing. Like, let's run the ball. We'll get the ball to Kelsey on third down, that kind of a thing. I think the Hollywood Brown acquisition at wide receiver could be massive for them. I think that could be huge. Now, he's got to stay healthy. Obviously, he's got to develop that rapport. But, he's that kind of Tyreek Hill-ish type player with the speed that, Mahomes, if they're keying in on on Travis Kelsey, or they're running the ball well and they can get play action going, Brown could get over the top. And then we didn't even talk about Xavier Worthy, their first round pick, who's got all-world speed. you almost have to change the way you defend this team. If you think about this, if you were a defensive coordinator a year ago, you weren't too worried about getting the top blown off, right? I mean, this was a dink and dunk team. I think Mahomes, on all his touchdowns, almost all of them were under 5 yards. It's like this was a really dink and dunk run the ball team. I think they're still going to be that to some extent. But when you add Worthy and Brown in there with Rashee Rice coming into a second year, assuming he's on the field and not in legal trouble, this could be that Chiefs offense that we saw a couple years ago before Tyreek Hill left. So all of a sudden now you got this top, call it 5 or 10 defense, and you've got this potentially explosive offense. Like, who's stopping that, man, with Andy Reid and Spagnuolo? I don't see it. So to me, that's my quick breakdown on the Chiefs. I just think that, this is definitely the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to you is this is very, very likely a three-peat in my opinion. I mean, we haven't seen one. I think the odds are actually stacked going in that direction, that it is likely that this team could three-peat or at the very least be the AFC representative here.
Yeah, I agree. They absolutely should be the favorites to win the Super Bowl again. I remember last year when we were talking about this team, and I said I thought maybe they would take a bit of a step back. Looking back at it, I actually think they did take a little bit of a step back.
They did, yeah.
Which is ridiculous given what happened in their season. But man, you remember these games where it was like Kadarius Toney dropping balls,
right?
Rashee Rice trying to figure out where to run because he was still young and learning things, right? I mean, they're MVS getting deep and then dropping the ball when it went right in his hands. I mean, it was almost like Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco, or nothing on this team last year. Now you actually give Patrick Mahomes some weapons back. And I don't think he even needs the best weapons in the league or anything. He needs competent receivers. Now, Yanni, I am a little bit disappointed that you missed the biggest offseason acquisition for the Chiefs. You forgot to mention it. Big Irv is now in Kansas City.
Right. Yeah.
And where Irv Smith goes, success follows. So Travis Kelce should be a little bit worried about his starting spot, I think, at tight end. But no, man, I'm with you. I do think obviously L'Jarius Sneed is a significant loss, and you talked about that. But okay, let's say that the defense goes from number 2 to number 5. Okay, I mean the offense is going to move back up, so it's not really going to matter.
Right.
A couple other things that I had on the Chiefs here. One is, I talk sometimes about the turnover differential and wins over expectation. The Chiefs were crazy, man. So they had a -9 turnover differential last year. They were 5.52 wins over expectation based on their turnover differential.
Yeah.
So this is a team, like, if they just hadn't turned the ball over, they would have hardly ever lost.
Right.
The other thing I do think with the Chiefs is, and we've talked about this with another, maybe the 49ers or another team here and there. Do they get bored with the regular season? This is one of the things that makes me a little hesitant on their win totals, because I think, should they go over 11.5? Yeah, probably, because they should be favored in most of the games that they play. But man, there are just times where they've looked disinterested.
Yeah.
And so that makes me a little bit hesitant. I actually have them for 11.25 wins. So I have them slightly under, but I think this line's set about right for me.
Real quick, I think the motivation piece is interesting here, though. And you're right. I mean, you're right. We've actually talked before about this team being the Golden State Warriors from 2017, right? Or 16. I agree with you on that. I do think overall, though, having the opportunity to go for that three-peat, I think, is going to keep this team motivated enough. More so in my opinion than last year, right? It's like last year they'd won the Super Bowl the year before. Maybe you have a letdown. Well, and maybe they did. Like you said, they did regress a little bit. Still won the Super Bowl. But I think, knowing that they can make history, so to speak, and, be that team, I think that keeps them interested enough. And, I think that when you've got Hall of Fame type players like Mahomes and Kelce and Chris Jones and these guys, there's enough veteran leadership there to say, guys, we can do something big here. And I think that motivation stays. Whereas maybe normally, like you said, they do get disinterested and whatever. And maybe they will. I mean, we'll see. But I think the motivation will stay there with this team.
And if it does, man, I really do think they should go well over that win total if they're really engaged throughout the whole season. One other thing I will throw out there. So I agree with you on the division at -230. And I didn't go look today. That's like a week ago. So
no, it's still there.
Is it still 230? Okay.
Yep.
I agree with you that I think that's a great line for them. I will say too, and I think I said this on Twitter, but if anyone, or X, sorry, I keep forgetting and calling it Twitter. If anyone wants to message me, it's a little involved and you need a handful of books to do it, but I did find a way to play them to win the division close to even odds as well, which is, ridiculous. So if anyone wants that, message me. I'd be happy to share it with you. Anything on players or anything here, Yanni, before we move on?
Not necessarily on players. I mean, I think, for me, I'm just looking through what I have written down. I did write down, I have not bet this yet. But there are a couple things that stand out to me, and Hollywood Brown is one. I mentioned him, and listen, they're going to spread the ball out. They're going to run it. We know Kelsey's going to get his. Rashee Rice obviously is going to get his. So, it's not, I wouldn't call this like, hey, this just seems too good to be true, but Hollywood Brown's at 750.5, and to me in this offense, a guy like that, I mean, I think he's 1,000-yard receiver this year. I really do. So I think there's some cushion there. Again, we talk regularly about playing season-long prop overs and the risk that you take with that. But I think that's definitely a player prop that you could look at. And the other thing that I'll put out there is, and I hate to say it, but Chiefs #1 seed in the AFC plus 350. Again, to me, like when you look at their strength of schedule and you look at their division and you compare them to the other contenders, a Baltimore, a Cincinnati, a Houston, a Buffalo, a Jets, the teams that are going to be kind of fighting in that mix, those teams have a gauntlet to run through, right? They got to beat a lot of teams. It's hard to envision those teams getting to be 13-4, right? Or, something, whatever the #1 seed is. The Chiefs could absolutely be 13-4, 14-3. I mean, that could absolutely happen. So I'm not opposed. I haven't bet it yet. I'm still, I'm still toying with the idea here, but at plus 350, I don't know, man. I mean, that seems, the way that their division and their conference is shaken out, that seems like a pretty good bargain to me.
Yeah, I have looked at the Jets for the #1 seed just because of the number. I'd have to go look what that number was. But you're absolutely right that the Jets have a much tougher road because of the division. Their schedule outside the division isn't too bad. But man, within the division, I don't think it's even close. So I agree with you. I mean, yeah, this is it's going to be another great team. And I think, one thing you could watch for too is watch if Casey ever would lose one game or even two in a row. Does that Super Bowl number get a little better? Because I don't think you'd be sorry to have a little bit of money on Kansas City for the Super Bowl at the end of the year. So
no, and I mean, you're right. If they do stumble early on, like you said, maybe they're disinterested. Maybe they're still figuring out some of those new offensive pieces, whatever. I mean, well, just like we saw last year. I mean, they didn't look great at times, and there they are in the Super Bowl. So no, I hear you.
Yep, and they do. I mean, they could win all these games like we've talked about, but they do start out a little bit more difficult. They have Baltimore, Cincinnati, Atlanta, then they go to the Chargers. So, I mean, there's a chance they could lose a couple games early.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
All right. Well, let's move on to the silver and black, the Las Vegas Raiders. Antonio Pierce coming back to bring that gritty identity to the Raiders and try to get them back to the glory days. Over under 6.5 here, a little bit juice to the under, -125 to the under, and plus 1,200 to win the division. Yanni, the Raiders are a team that has showed some life at times, but really struggled to be truly competitive. Is this a team that can show some life this year under Antonio Pierce?
I think they can. I'll say that right off the bat. I kind of like this Raiders team a little bit here. Now, do I like them to win the division? No. Kind of like I said, I mean, this is KC's division, but 6.5 wins, that's not a lot. I mean, if you think about it, that's one more than Denver. And to me, the Raiders are a substantially better team than Denver, when I look at these two. Now, they do have a fairly difficult schedule. In my opinion, at least according to their division mates, they've got the toughest schedule there. So, that certainly factors in when you start looking at which games can they win and all that. But here's the thing, what I like about this team, and I won't say, I know we talked about it briefly. We mentioned it last week or on our last podcast. It wasn't for me getting to play blackjack with a few of their defensive players there. I won't name any names there,
That's
but
right.
maybe there's a certain soft spot on the heart.
That's right.
But here's the thing. I really like what they did in the offseason. So first of all, I loved retaining Antonio Pierce. I mean, I think he fits this team perfectly. The players seem to absolutely love him. And I mean, I think that goes a long way. Now, is that going to get you to the Super Bowl? No, you need more than that. But I think that's a great starting point. And I love their offseason. I mean, when I look at their draft, I think getting Brock Bowers, I mean, he can be a difference maker. We'll see. Kyle Pitts, for example, has not living up to that billing yet at tight end, right? I mean, he's never kind of gotten there. We'll see if Bowers can, but I think he certainly has that upside, to be that kind of guy. I like, they focused on offensive line with Jackson Powers Johnson there. I think he's a solid player that can step in and play. And then I love the Christian Wilkins pickup. I think that he fits this team so well. And I think finally giving somebody next to Max Crosby, a little bit of life there, that's going to be tough. Now, what they really need is they need a guy like Tyree Wilson, their first round pick from last year, the previous year. They need someone like that to step up opposite of Max Crosby. But if something like that can happen, and you start looking at Crosby's a game wrecker by himself. I mean, he's one of the few guys that he'll get double teamed, he'll still make plays. But I think now with Wilkins there, and, again, if they can get someone else, I don't think this defense is that bad. I think it's actually fairly decent. Their linebackers are solid. I think Spillane's an underrated linebacker. Divine Diablo's a solid player there. So, secondary, I think, is solid, if not great. So, again, I kind of like this defense. I don't think it's a liability like it has been for this team in the last, decade. It's been a while since they've had a really good defense. And I'm not saying this is going to be a really good defense, but I don't think it's going to be a bad defense. I think it can keep them in games. And then when I look to the offensive side of the ball, here's the thing for me. Gardner Minshew is the most disrespected, underrated freaking quarterback in this league. The guy comes in and competes. And yes, I know he's not the prototypical, big, strong, slinging around. I mean, he's kind of wild. He runs around. He does crazy things. He's got a mullet. He does, all that. I get it. But the guy comes in, and when you look at his numbers, and, I know this because locally here, I'm in Florida, and they'll put numbers up like Gardner Minshew versus Trevor Lawrence, for example. And it's like, wow, Gardner Minshew's better than Trevor Lawrence,
Wow.
And you don't think that, right? If I asked you who's a better quarterback, 99 out of 100 people are probably, Trevor Lawrence by a mile, right?
Mm-hmm.
The stats don't necessarily say that. So, again, I think there's a little bit of underrated here. I think he gives them a stable presence there. And when you have guys like Devontae Adams, and if you can get a Brock Bowers going and some of these guys where he can get them that ball. And again, I think now you have a potentially good offense, a potentially good defense, maybe not great either way, but at least decent. I think you can win some games with that. The one thing that I think could hurt this position, and this is weird because we almost never talk about this, is running back, right? I mean, normally we're like, you plug a running back in and you move on. And I think by and large, that's a pretty fair rule in the NFL. But losing Josh Jacobs could hurt them, though. I think that, he was the type of guy that when he was running hard, man, he was making plays for them. And I just don't know with Zamir White, and I think they brought your guy Alexander Madison in there. And I just don't know that they have enough there where, you want that run to be respected to where you can get good coverages for guys like Devontae Adams and, the other receivers. So we'll see how big of an impact that has. But I'll be honest with you, man, I like this team. I like them even with a relatively tough schedule. I like them to get over that 6.5 win threshold. I think they get to 7, 8 plus wins.
Our guy Shady is going to like hearing that there's some hope in Vegas this year. Let me ask you this, Yanni, because you usually are more clued into this stuff than I am on a deeper level. What do you think about this offensive line? Because some of the rankings I've looked at have them at the bottom or near the bottom of the league. Do you think it's better than where they're being ranked, or do you think that's accurate?
I think it's fair to question where they are on their offensive line. I don't think it's a good offensive line. I mean, it's not one you're going to be like, man, they're just going to whatever. But I mean, to me, I think that kind of goes to what I was saying about the running back position, where are these guys, Zamir White, Alexander Madison, if they're not getting great blocking, can they make things happen? I don't worry so much on the passing game. When you kind of look at Gardner Minshew's career, he's pretty good at shuffling around in the pocket and, getting rid of the ball and that. So I don't worry as much throwing the ball. But if a team becomes too one-dimensional, like if they can't run the ball at all, that can become a big problem. And that would be my concern, because I think that's fair to point out that the offensive line is not great. It may not even be good. And when you have that with, I guess, what I would call pedestrian running backs, if that's a fair statement, you could become one-dimensional, and that would be my big concern there. Again, I like Jackson Powers Johnson. I think that, he was a good addition for them. But when you look overall at a five-man line there, it's not great. It's definitely, like you said, I mean, I don't have my ranking of them. I don't even know what I did with it here, but I know I definitely don't have them near the top. I don't remember exactly where I had them, but it is fair to point that out.
Yeah. That's just my biggest concern, because I largely agree with you on Gardner Minshew. I think the thing with Gardner Minshew, where it's good to look at stats because your eyes can deceive you, is he makes some bad plays in big situations at times. And then you're like, oh, this guy's terrible. But the reality is he makes some big plays in some of those situations too. He almost I mean, I'm not saying he's as good or anything, but it reminds me a little bit of Brett Favre, just with that gunslinger mentality. And I do like the weapons here. I mean, I know Devontae Adams is getting older, but we kind of forget that this is one of the best receivers in the league. And yes, he's going to slow down here at some point, but I don't know, if somebody can get him the ball, I think he's a massive weapon. I like Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers is a good receiver. So when you get to like a 1-2 punch in terms of the wide receiving core, I think this is a team that's kind of up there. And I'd have to go like actually rank the teams. I don't know exactly where I think they are, but up near the top. And then to your point, with Brock Bowers and even Michael Mayer, we'll see what he does after being drafted highly a couple years ago. This is a good skill position group outside of the running back. Now, people are high on Zamir White. I don't know. We'll see. And especially if he's not getting any space to run with that offensive line,
right,
it could be trouble. But I guess I'm just saying, I'm with you. Like, that's why I asked you about the offensive line, because I think if the offensive line can even hold up okay, this is a good group of skill position players. And I think this is an offense that could move the ball against a lot of teams. So I like that. On the defensive side of the ball, certainly have to like the front here. And, the Broncos, at least in division, I'm not too afraid of the Broncos passing attack. We're going to get to the Chargers, and Justin Herbert's good, but I don't think they're going to be relying on the passing attack heavily. So I think the Raiders are set up well on defense to compete with those teams in their division, other than the Chiefs, and who's going to compete with the Chiefs in this division anyway. So, yeah, so I have them just in my modeled wins at 7.14. So definitely I have them over that 6.5. And I do think there is some upside here if that offensive line can hold up a little bit. I think they could give a lot of teams some trouble. But at the end of the day, I don't see them getting higher than maybe they can get to 9 wins and they could challenge for a wild card spot. I think that's the ceiling for this team.
I think that's what they end up being, is they end up being around an 8-win team that's like kind of in that wild card mix, in the hunt group there that we see on the TV. And I think that's who they are. But, to me, I don't know. I guess to me, 7.5 wins would probably be more accurate for a preseason prediction here. So, seeing the 6.5, I don't know, man. I like going over on that.
Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah. All right. Anything here on player props at all?
No, nothing specifically with the Raiders here. I think that over 6.5 is really all that I like with this team here that jumps out to me.
Okay. I didn't look this up, so it could be a terrible thing to throw out there, but given our conversation and not knowing, what the workload will be, I could see an under on Zamir White's rushing yards too. Maybe that ends up being a little more of a committee. And if he's not getting the space to run, he's probably not putting up huge games.
Yeah, I think it will be a committee. I think between Madison, they brought Amir Abdullah back. So, I mean, I think it'll end up being a committee. I think Abdullah will be the third down guy a lot. And, I think we'll see Madison on series. So I hear you. And I don't know what it is. I haven't looked, but I don't foresee a big rushing year from a guy like Zamir White.
Yeah, same. Enough of Yanni and I talking about the Raiders. It's time to get somebody in here who actually is a fan and actually knows what the hell they're talking about, which is why we got my friend Shady. Shady, what's happening?
Well, just another day, fucking busting my hump, making some real life units.
So you can go bet those real life units on the Raiders?
Yeah, I can kill myself on the weekend on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. Well, dude, how are the Raiders looking this year, man? You hopeful?
I mean, a couple of seasons ago, I mean, they ended up making the fucking playoffs when they fired fucking Gruden. And then they passed on Rich Bisaccia, who had the locker room, guys playing for him. And then you get the New England Raiders. You get McDaniels in there for 2 years. The first year, I mean, once they made that move, I was kind of like, dude, what the fuck? You know, they should have kept Bisaccia or went a different route. Then he comes in and tries to do New England way. And you got to think that first year, they blew a 4 or 5 games where they had like a double-digit lead going in to the second half. And, you know, you ended up switching those games around, man. Maybe they might have had a playoff spot. And then we roll around second year. They got rid of Carr in the offseason. So that's when I was like, all right, man, I'm boycotting them. I'm fucking done with them. Just got no faith in McDaniels. And then this guy's supposed to be an offensive guru and can't put any points up. I mean, you look at the stretch of games that he had, like last year, man, he put up 17, 10, 10, 17, 17, 21, 12, 14. And then he got fired over there at Chicago. And then when they got rid of Carr, it was like, oh, we're going to bring in Jimmy G, you know, the injured reserve quarterback who's always getting hurt. You know, obviously he's made a name for himself with the Patriots and got a payday off of that. I mean, he was with Kyle Shanahan, and he had a defense behind him with the Niners. And as soon as they got Jimmy G, I was like, man, we got this bum at quarterback. So the big issue now is the quarterback situation. Because you look after those first 8 games before they fired him, defense wasn't playing well. The locker room wasn't, you know, on par, or they weren't in sync. And then you get Antonio Pierce, and he just kind of gives the players free reign, and they kind of go back to like playing the Raider way. Everyone hates on the Raiders, and like, yeah, we're a dysfunctional franchise, but you go back to the Al Davis, man, and he's like made a lot of marks on the NFL with doing a lot of shit like his way. And like they kind of reverted back to that where like, hey, we don't care, we're gonna do us. So not only did he get the locker room, but then he got the fan base back where it's like, okay, you know, we're doing things different. And you look at the defense, which is probably going to be the strong point with the Raiders this year. And, you know, granted, I'm just going to rattle off some numbers here on some games with the defense. They played the Giants, and they took out Daniels in that game, and they ended up allowing like 6 points. They played the Jets with no Rodgers, and they ended up giving up 12 points. Then they play Miami, 20 points. KC, 31 points. Minnesota, you remember that game? That fucking stinker.
Oh my gosh, dude. When you started talking about these, I'm like, oh, he's going to get to Minnesota. What a game that was.
Yeah, 0 to fucking 3 in that game, right? So, then they blew out San Diego. They gave up 21 points in that game, you know, after they scored fucking 63, which was like garbage time when they scored.
What a beatdown that was. Yeah.
So, and then you got KC at home. They gave up 14 points. I mean, the fucking offense didn't score shit. It was the defense and then the field goal kicker making all the points. 23 to the Colts, and then 14 to Denver. Denver's kind of trash, but the defense turned it around, and that's going to be their strong point. The issue is with quarterback, man. Like that AOC kid, he's young. He got thrown to the wolves. He was better than Jimmy G, but like they're not scoring any points in the red zone. And they got special teams, so I mean they can kick field goals all day, man. But they need to score down there, especially with the offensive weapons that they have. So obviously everyone's that's going to be tuning in the Raiders. They're already going to know, hey, their defense is going to be their strong point, and then they're going to look out here and figure out, hey, what's the quarterback situation going?
You hope it's Minshew?
I think he's a better candidate. He's got more experience. He's not going to sit back there in a pocket like a statue. And then, like, I saw a stat that, like, I saw it somewhere on Twitter. I don't know where I saw it, dude. Maybe it was from Yanni. Maybe Yanni retweeted or something, man. But it had, and if you go look it up now, you're going to see Trevor Lawrence NFL stats compared to Minshew Mania. And then, you know, obviously the quarterback market is out of control with these guys getting paid, regardless if they're bums or not bums. You know what I mean? Like, the cap and the contracts that they're giving out are ridiculous. So, and they are right there even with the stats. So, you know, Minshew don't have to be the MVP, man. All he has to do is manage the game. And they're going to run the ball with White. I mean, that cornbread country guy, he's got low mileage on him. They're going to run the ball, play defense, man, and convert on third down. So that's all you need him to do. And he's got a better shot. And you can kind of tell a testament as far as, like, just week one in Minnesota. Like, more than likely, he's going to win I think he's going to win the starting gig, man. And they probably should give it to him and then let AOC develop. And then the Raiders will figure out later on who they want their quarterback to be for the future. Because going into the draft, man, there was a lot of well tales and like, oh, we're gonna mortgage everything for a QB, and I didn't want that. And then it kind of goes back to the offense, man. They already got Devontae Adams. They got Myers, who came up from New England. I didn't like that guy right out the gate because he's a Patriot. You know what I'm saying? But then, like,
He's good though, man.
He's earning his salary because they're doubling Devontae Adams. You know, like I said, we had Jacobs. He's gone. We weren't going to pay him, so, you know, no harm, no foul there. You got the tight end from Notre Dame. So
Meyer.
Now they picked up some pieces where they added some O-line. They added the tight end. And it kind of goes back to the draft where I was like, man, I hope they don't mortgage everything for a quarterback. And then you saw the fucking dominoes fall, dude, where all those quarterbacks went like the first 10 picks. So I was hoping, like, hey, let's get a quarterback. Let's get an O-line. The top 3 O-lines were gone. And then the quarterbacks didn't start coming off till, like, you know, early 20s. So when I took Brock Bowers, I was kind of like, But then I understand that, man. Like, Tom Kolesko, he's going to take the best player available. And then you got the Bears offensive coordinator where he runs 2 tight end sets. So that just gives them, like, 2 weapons. So with the 2 tight ends they have, and then you got to think, too, the O-lines that they drafted. I mean, that Jackson kid from Oregon, a former wrestler, like, he's going to be on the inside. They re-signed James, the center. They had Farham a couple years back in the draft. They got Munford, who was like a low draft pick from Ohio State. Dude, he's probably going to be our right tackle. And then you got Miller. So Miller needs to stay healthy for sure. But then we got Pete, we got Whitehair, and then we drafted that other kid, Glaze, in the 3rd round. So, like, we got some pieces on the offensive line where they're going to be able to protect the quarterback. And then you figure, man, like I said, with the 2 tight ends and the 2 wideouts with Devontae and Myers, and then you got that kid Tucker, the speedster. there's no reason why they can't sit there and convert some third downs, man, and their offense be a little bit better and actually start scoring in the fucking red zone. Because that's what their problem is, man. Their defense is going to keep them in the game, but they got to score in the red zone.
So here's a question for you. You talked about them running the ball and playing defense. Also, they clearly have a lot of good weapons. Do you see this being a team that tends to be in lower scoring games that are close, or do you think they're able to run up some points in some of these games?
No, I think if you're gonna bet, dude, like you'll be betting fucking unders. So like I said, man, a lot of emphasis is gonna be played on defense. So you gotta think too. I mean, they signed Spillane to like shore up the middle, okay, and then we got super lucky with Jones that we got from the Patriots because he was over it and his relationship with Antonio Pierce, and we got him on contract for super cheap for the next 2 years. Eventually, we're gonna have to pay him. We got Hobbs. We got that Bennett guy who might play on the other side, and then there's some other cornerbacks that might be in the mix depending on how healthy they stay. We got that kid from Ohio State, the linebacker. We also got Diablo, that Hawaiian. But the main thing is it's going to be that D line, that rotation of the D line. Kuntz came on because everyone's doubling Crosby, right?
Yeah.
So now you got Wilkins coming in to beef up the middle, and he's going to rotate with Butler and Jenkins. And then you got the 5th round pick Wilson last year who came out the gate injured, and he's still learning. And I don't think he's going to be a superstar or anything like that. It's they've been using him in the middle, rotating him in rather than on the edge. But so they're going to have a rotation of guys on the D line where they're going to keep them, pretty much fresh to get after the quarterback. And then you got the 2 guys on the back end. Epps, who came over from the Eagles a couple years back, and then Morwig, man. So, like, the defense is looking pretty good.
All right, so here's my other question is, with the defense you've talked about, with the weapons and hopefully a quarterback in Minshew who can make some things happen, how do you see the Raiders stacking up in this division, and ultimately do you think they make the playoffs?
If they do get in the playoffs, it's going to be a wild card. Kansas City's been running that division for a long time. Denver, I don't think Denver's going to get after it, man. They're rebuilding. They're going to be like 3 years down the road, especially with all that money that they're dead money on with Broncos country. Let's ride, Russell Wilson. They got that kid Nix, man. We'll see how he does. And then you got San Diego, who they lost a lot of players this year, man, that they didn't want to pay. And then San Diego, they're always choke artists. Their players get injured all the time. They got the khakis over there now, so we'll see how he does. But at the end of the day, man, it's gonna depend on the quarterback play. And I'm hopeful that we do get a wild card spot. Are we gonna win the fucking Super Bowl? Probably not, man. But like, if we got a chance to like roll the dice and get in the playoffs, dude, I'll be a happy camper.
Well, dude, thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it. And also go follow Shady on X as well. I'll drop his handle in the comments. I know he doesn't care quite as much, but still he's definitely worth following. So go check that out. Thanks for jumping on, man.
All right, brother. I'll be in the loop.
All right, before we go on to the Chargers, if you have not, please go to X, follow Yanni at Yanni_bet, also at the Bet Crushers. You can follow me at Big Tasty Sports, and then check out the websites too. Go and bookmark them. That's old school. I'm in my 40s, so I still bookmark things. BigTastySports.com and BetCrushers.com can get all the info that we'll have coming out. So please go and do that. All right, the Chargers are the big offseason team, right? Because they got Jim Harbaugh, and that's the big news. Greg Roman comes back with him as offensive coordinator. He brings Jesse Minter along with him from Michigan to be the defensive coordinator. this is a team that we talk about every year just perennially underperform. Every year it's like, oh, they've got the talent, they could go far, and then they just implode. The question is how much of that was coaching. Also, I'm sure, you'll get to this, but they definitely shook up the roster, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So it's going to be interesting to see what that means for this team. I will say I do have them with the 31st ranked schedule. So the easiest other than the Falcons for me, which will come into play later. Their over-under is set at 8.5, but it's juiced to the over, minus 145 to the over, plus 380 to win the division, which is the second best odds, which is pretty much where they've been year after year, right behind the Chiefs. Yep. Is this team better positioned to compete with the Chiefs this year, Yanni?
Nope. They're not. Here's what I'll say. I like the hiring of Jim Harbaugh. I do think that is what this organization needed, was something like that. But I also think that this team is in a rebuild. I think that they're not ready yet. So if you ask me 12 months from now, obviously we'll have to see what a lot can happen in 12 months. But if you ask me 12 months from now, I think this team could be really good. I don't think they're going to be really good yet. And I'll kind of explain why here. So you kind of mentioned new coaches, coordinators, that kind of a thing. There's some excitement there, but you got to figure it out. I'm not a Greg Roman guy, first of all. Now I will say that he can do some things, usually like he's kind of one of those coordinators that gets off to like a hot start with the team, right? And and then all of a sudden teams figure him out a little bit. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a big fan. We'll see how that plays out. But here's kind of where I'm at with this team right now. Definitely headed in the right direction, but nowhere near where they need to be yet. And when I look at I'll start with the offense here. Herbert is as talented as any guy in the league. I think most people would agree with that. He hasn't fully been able to put it together. Now, he's fought through a lot of injuries with his skill players and that. And I mean, that makes it tough for a quarterback. He's had his own injuries. At times, their offensive line wasn't great in his career so far. So, I don't want to put that all on him because I think he can be a top quarterback in this league. I think he's kind of shown that he can. But he also hasn't really done anything, right? I mean, it's like he makes some really good throws. Sometimes, he'll put up some good stats. At the end of the day, it's like, what has it gotten him so far? So when I look at this offense, I like what they did with their draft. I like that they, tried to bring in a cornerstone offensive lineman there. I think that's always a great place to start. And I think that Ladd McConkey is going to be the steal of this draft. I think he's going to be the best player that, basically fell, if you want to call it that, in this draft. I think he has star written all over him. And I know there's the obvious, Cooper Kupp, whatever you want to call it there. I get it, but that's not a bad thing. Let's say he is similar to Cooper Kupp, right? That's not a bad thing. So I think, they did some really good things in the draft, but here's where I'm at. If their offensive line can play well, we'll see. Again, they've got some talent there. They got to put it together. They haven't really fully proven that. If they can put it together and keep Herbert healthy, I think they went backwards running the ball. And I realize Austin Eckler was not the explosive guy that, maybe he was a few years ago, injuries, all that kind of thing. But, they're bringing in a guy like Gus Edwards. I mean, he was a product of that Baltimore running system. I mean, he's not doing anything for me. J.K. Dobbins is probably has the more upside, but he's coming off like his 15th torn ACL. I mean, I don't know what you're getting out of him. So I don't know that they're going to be able to run the ball well. And when you look at throwing it, I don't think you can understate the importance that Keenan Allen had in this offense. And you could absolutely sell me on the fact that it was time to let him go. I mean, the guy's old, you're new coach, you're moving on. So I have no problem with the decision to move on from Keenan Allen. But I think you're going to notice like not having that there, what that does. Now, I do think Ladd McConkey will fill a big role with that, but I think you're going to notice that there. And when you go beyond that, Quentin Johnston, by all accounts, is an absolute bust at this point. I mean, all I see is he can't catch the ball. He had no separation a year ago. Who knows? Maybe he'll turn it around, but it sure doesn't look like it. You start looking at a guy like Josh Palmer. Okay, he's a capable guy, but I mean, how much is he really going to give you there? They brought in a guy like Hayden Hurst. Okay, kind of same thing. Capable guy at tight end, but what's he really going to do? So I don't think this offense has enough, even with Herbert and a potentially good offensive line. We'll see. I don't think they have enough yet to really, go toe to toe if it's one of those high scoring games, right? Those 35 to 32 games. I don't know if they're there yet. And I don't think this offense will be bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting they're going to struggle and put up points. I just don't think they're going to be great. And then when I flip to the defensive side of the ball, here's what I see. This defense reminds me a lot of the Rams defense when they won the Super Bowl, in the sense that they've got a few really big names, really good players, and a lot of guys that I'm not sure should be starting in this league. And we'll see. And here's my other problem with that. Joey Bosa has yet to stay healthy the last couple seasons, right? I mean, he just hasn't. Now, hopefully he will, but he certainly hasn't proven that he can. Khalil Mack at some point is slowing down, right? I mean, he hasn't looked like it. He's looked really good even in his older age here, but at some point he's slowing down. And I'll be honest with you, I think Derwin James may be the most overrated player in the league. I don't know if people agree with me or not on that. I'm not saying he's a bad player. I just think people hype him up like he's, Ed Reed and whatever back there. And I just don't think he is. I think he's just a good safety. So I look at that defense, and then you start looking at those other pieces around there, and you're like, I don't know about this guy. Like, this guy hasn't done much, like, that kind of a thing. I don't think this defense got better at all. When you kind of look, like, they brought in, it's like they let these like mediocre veterans go, and maybe even good veterans when you talk about guys like Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, whoever. And they brought in guys like Denzel Perryman and DJ Shark, and I think Bradley Bozeman came over. And it's like they replaced them with like meh, these guys, they're fine. Like, they can be on a roster, but are they moving the dial for a defense that was not good last year? Not to me. If anything, I think the defense could be worse this year, and they weren't good last year. So again, I think this team did the right thing hiring Jim Harbaugh. I think with Herbert, they have their guy. I think that, they got a steal in McConkey. I think this team could definitely be really good in a year. They need another good offseason. They need to bring in a couple more pieces probably on the defensive side of the ball, get familiar with the coaching system and all that. But I don't think they're very good right now. So even though, and I'm with you, I have them like you, the second easiest schedule in the league. Their schedule's not hard. I still don't know that they get over 8.5 wins. I don't. And, I've got some other bets that we can talk about here when after you give your breakdown here, but that's kind of where I am on this team.
Yeah, just to jump straight to it, I have them exactly at 8.5 wins. And I have, from the beginning, when I started doing analysis like months ago, I was like, I'm going to fade the Chargers this year. And it's that schedule's killing me, man. I just feel like I can't fade them with that schedule. I agree with most of what you said. I have had these moments where I talk myself into like, okay, if this offensive line is a good run blocking line, Gus Edwards is a workhorse. I don't think he's great, but he's a workhorse. So he could do okay if they're able to run block well. If they can control the game, so I'll talk myself into like against a bad schedule, this team's going to be able to be in most games. But you pointed to it. We know the variance there is in the NFL. And if they get in a game where Herbert throws a pick six, they're in trouble.
Yep.
Anytime they're in a position where they're going to have to come back, I think it's trouble because they're not going to be able to lean on that running game anymore. And while Justin Herbert is a very good quarterback, I don't like these weapons. They lost Gerald Everett too, which again, Hayden Hurst replaced him. Maybe it's not a big loss, but it's just like you said, they switched out decent for meh. And yeah, Lad McConkey, I don't know. I don't have a strong of a feeling on him, but he could be really good. And he probably has a decent year if he is really good, because they're going to need somebody to step up. But I just think that this team's margin for error is low, is what I would say. Like, I think they're middle of, actually, I have them below average this year. Like just straight up power ranking teams. I have them below the middle of the league. I don't remember what number I had them at. I don't think I have a lot to add to what you've said. Just the lack of talent here. And yes, a few big name players, but I think it's just an average roster across the board. The other thing I will say is, and I don't know what they'll do on defense, but having a guy coming in from college in his first year as a defensive coordinator too, maybe he'll be great. I have no idea, but that's a transition as well. So I'm just not high on this team. I hope the Raiders get them and the Chargers end up in third in this division. But those two will probably battle it out. All right. Other bets for you, Yanni, whether it's on the Chargers or anything else here.
Yeah, so I got a couple with the Chargers here, a few actually potentially. You can bet Chargers to miss the playoffs at -120. And I'll be honest, even if this team, let's say they beat their win total and they get to 9 wins, that's not guaranteed in the AFC to get you in the playoffs. So I mean, let's assume Kansas City wins this division, you're essentially fighting for, let's just hypothetically say that Baltimore and Houston and Buffalo win their divisions. Hypothetically, you're fighting for wild cards with Cincinnati, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, the Jets, the Dolphins, the Colts. I mean, there are a lot of teams in that mix. So I think this team's going to have a hard path to the playoffs here, because we know they're not going to get there in the division. And I just don't know that they're going to be able to win enough games to get to that, 10 win mark, let's say, to try to secure a playoff seed. And they could get there at 9, whatever. But I like them to miss the playoffs at -120. I mean, I think that's an in-play bet for me.
I like that a lot better than the win total bet. I was just pulling out my notebook here because I had done some projections for divisions and playoffs and everything this last week. And I have them a full game and a half behind the team that I have in 7th. In the AFC right now. So I have them, pretty significant. I mean, I have them on my list of the teams still fighting for it, but I have them down the list a little bit.
I mean, I think you have to look at it, again, let's just hypothetically say those 4 favorites win their division, right?
Yeah.
Are they better than Cincinnati? Not if Burrow's healthy. Are they better than Cleveland? I don't think so.
I don't think at all.
Are they better than the Jets? No, as long as Rodgers is healthy. Miami? Are they better than the Dolphins? Probably not. No. I mean, Indy, Jacksonville. I mean, any of those teams. So I think, to me, that definitely is a very, live bet that you can look at there. So to miss the playoffs. The other two that I have actually are pro Charger bets here, and that's Ladd McConkey. And again, I don't claim to be a draft expert. I don't know. I just look at what I see, and I like what I see. And I think that he's going to end up being wide receiver 1 for them. So I think by default, he's going to get peppered with a lot of targets. And I think he has a lot of upside. Now, again, he's a rookie wide receiver, not an easy position to come in and do, but I think if anybody can do it, it's a guy like that. So his yardage total is at 725.5. Somebody's got to catch passes for this team. It's not going to be Quentin Johnson. Like you said, I can't imagine Hayden Hurst does a whole lot there. Yeah, Josh Palmer will get some, but somebody's got to catch passes, right? Yeah. I think it's him. So, I think by default, he's going to climb over that number there. I like that a lot. And then if you want to play the lottery, I mean, you can get him up to plus 4,000 as an offensive rookie of the year. Same kind of concept there. Somebody's got to catch passes. Now, obviously, you're fighting against the quarterbacks with that one, guys like Caleb Williams and, Bo Nix and some of these guys. But, I mean, at plus 4,000. JJ McCarthy, there you go. But at plus 4,000, there's worse bets to make. But I really like it over his yardage total. I mean, I think he ends up at that 1,000-yard mark as a rookie here, just by the fact that somebody's got to catch passes for this team.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't mind it. I think I'm sick of the Chargers. Is what it comes down to. I just don't really want to see them do well, but this will be the year where they don't actually go in the dumpster and they end up being okay, probably, since they got Harbaugh.
I don't know. We'll see. I think it's going to take Harbaugh a year to get this thing rolling. I really do.
They do need some more talent. I agree with that. Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's wrap things up with ranking a few things here, Yanni. Let's start out with ranking the 4 coaches in this division.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it's obviously a no-brainer. I think you have to give Andy Reid, top billing here. And I don't think anybody can really argue that too much. I went with Harbaugh second here. I'm kind of basing it on his collective book of work. When you look at the Niners, when you look at what he did in college, but I think the guy does have that cliche where he kind of just knows how to make things happen and win. So I've got him second. I actually went with Antonio Pierce third. I like him a lot. I think he's a perfect fit for that team. I think what he lacks, maybe in experience or maybe the X's and O's a little bit, he makes up for, with the way he handles his players and handles himself in that. And, I kind of alluded to it with the Broncos. I mean, Sean Payton's got a Super Bowl win. It's crazy to put him fourth. And I'm not even saying Sean Payton's a bad coach. I think, we've talked about some of these divisions. Some have really good coaches, some don't. I think this is a division that has some good coaching. I don't know. I mean, we'll see if Sean Payton can make this Denver team into a contender. I'll eat crow and we'll move him up towards right behind Andy Reid there. But, for right now, give me the other 3 guys ahead of Peyton at this point.
Man, I thought for sure we'd disagree here, but I have the same order actually. And I agree. I just think Sean Payton has something to prove. And obviously he, winning a Super Bowl, that gives you a certain credibility. But I don't know. It just hasn't looked good. So I go back to who would I want coaching my team. And I just feel like Sean Payton has sucked some of the life out of that organization, honestly, with the way he's coached and the way he's handled players. X's and O's are one thing, but there's another thing. Just you think about what Antonio Pierce brings to a locker room versus what Sean Payton seems to be bringing to a locker room. And that energy that they bring does count for something. It's not everything, but it counts for something.
Yeah. I really feel, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I feel like Payton, he didn't necessarily have to be that guy in New Orleans because he had Drew Brees. I mean, essentially he was the coach on the field. Right. And, obviously Russ Wilson couldn't do that. It's asking a lot to ask a rookie to come in and do that. So we'll see. I think you're right. I think Peyton has to prove that, hey, that Super Bowl win was just as much me as it was Drew Brees and everybody else on that roster. And, for me, I need to see something to say, yeah, you're right, Sean, that was you as well. Because right now I'm starting to think that was the roster and not the coach.
Yep. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. All right, let's go to let's do the defenses next.
I've got the Chiefs first. Again, I mentioned they were number 2 last year, maybe a slight regression here, but I still think they'll be, very good. I went with the Raiders second. I mentioned Max Crosby and Wilkins in that defensive line. I think, there aren't a lot of holes in that defense. There's not a lot of weakness in it. So I've got them second. I put the Chargers third just because if Bosa can stay healthy, if Mac still has some in the tank, I mean, they have the pass rush. So, I kind of have them third. And I went last with the Broncos, and it was tough to do because the Broncos generally play tough on defense, generally. Obviously, we didn't see that against Miami last year, but normally they play tough on defense. But when you look at that roster, there's other than Patrick Surtain, there's not a lot of difference makers on that defense. It's a lot of blah. So I just, unfortunately, I think that defense is going to struggle a little bit.
Yep. I had Kansas City first. I have the Chargers and the Raiders closer than you do. I think I still have a little bit of concern for the Raiders secondary, but obviously up front, they're really strong. So just to mix it up, I'll say Chargers, then Raiders, just because we have to disagree about something. And I think Denver's fourth by a good bit, actually. To your point, they've historically been pretty good, but I agree about the talent on that side of the ball now. So I think that defense is looking rough, which is another reason why they probably won't be a very good team.
Yep.
So, all right, offenses.
I went with the Chiefs first, and I think these offenses are not very spread. To your point, I think these are pretty close on offense. But I think the Chiefs are the default, right? They've got the best quarterback. They've got Andy Reid. And, I mean, to me, that's enough to keep them number 1. I mentioned the addition, obviously, of Hollywood Brown, a guy like Xavier Worthy. I think this offense only gets better. And they weren't great last year. I mean, they were not, they were okay. But I think they'll be better this year. I think they'll be one of the better offenses in the league. So I've got them first. I actually went with the Chargers second, and I struggled with it, but I kind of did the quarterback thing again where I'm like, all right, I got Herbert here. Obviously, you can tell I'm high on Ladd McConkey in that. So I'm like, I gave him a slight nod over the Raiders. And really, it was more, it came down to quarterback and kind of what you mentioned with the Raiders offensive line. I was like, if the Raiders can't run the ball, can they all of a sudden not throw the ball, if that makes sense? And that was my concern. So that's why I have the Chargers ahead of the Raiders. And then I have the Broncos. I don't think the Broncos offense again is going to be terrible. It's going to depend on what Bo Nix does. But I also just can't see him being great. I mean, like we said, they have just kind of these okay guys out there that they're marching out there that, I mean, whatever, they'll have a few drives where they score some points. But I mean, at the end of the day, unfortunately, I think they're behind the other 3 on both sides of the ball.
Yep. I'm KC. I actually have the Raiders second, and all the things you said. Quarterback would be a reason to go with the Chargers. I like the weapons that the Raiders have. Yeah. But there's different strengths there. They're very different offenses. So I had the Chargers third, and then I had Denver fourth by, to me, again, a good bit. I think that the Broncos are kind of trailing in every category in this.
It depends on Bo Nix, but you're right. I mean, they are. I mean, it's hard to see unless Nix can come in and be an absolute, rookie phenom. This offense isn't going to be great, right? I mean, they're going to struggle. Yeah.
Yep. All right, Yanni. What order are these teams going to finish?
Well, you probably picked up on it from, where I'm at. Obviously, I think the
Chargers,
Chiefs.
number
Yeah,
one, right? This is the year.
this is not the year for me. I think the Chiefs win this division pretty easily. I think they win it by. I think they have a 3-game cushion, in this division, give or take. I've got the Raiders second. I think they could leapfrog the Chargers here. Maybe I'm just being optimistic because, like you, I kind of don't really love the Chargers right now, and I mean, I am kind of favoring the Raiders, but I just think that the Raiders have a better overall roster, at this point, and I just think that there's something there with that team that they're going to fight and be competitive under Antonio Pierce. There's something that's telling me that. So I've got the Raiders second there. I've got the Chargers right behind them, and then obviously a pretty distant fourth with the Broncos.
Yeah, I'm Casey. Hate to say it, but I'm Chargers second, and so much of it comes down to that schedule to me.
Yeah.
I want to put the Raiders up higher, and I do think the Raiders are a team that's much more likely to be able to get on a run and outperform where they should be. So I'll be very happy if that's the case. But Chargers third, Broncos fourth. No big surprise there. This is Casey's division for the foreseeable future here. And I think that happens again this year. When you said it's a three-game cushion they have here, aside from Patrick Mahomes getting hurt for the majority of the season, yeah, I think 3 or 4 games is very, very likely here. So, All right, man. Well, fun breaking down another division. We got 2 to go, and then is that right? Yeah, we have the AFC North and the AFC South left, and then we'll get on to actually picking some games once the season gets going.
Those last 2 may be the two most fun to break down, honestly.
They're fun. Yeah. I agree. We might even disagree a little bit, man. It could be amazing.
Those teams are fairly close, so there should be a little disagreement.
There's a lot of moving parts to try to dig into, so it'll be fun. But all right, man. We'll appreciate you. Thanks for all the insight, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.